Based in London, Will Holder is an artist, writer, editor, and designer, interested in different forms of publishing. His publications do not always take the form of ink on paper, and a large part of his preoccupation is spent finding suitable forms of transmission. He's the editor of F.R. David, published by De Appel in Amsterdam. Together with Alex Waterman, Holder is currently editing and designing a biography of American composer Robert Ashley for Two or More Voices. Will Holder.
And thanks, James. That was a really great talk. Where is he? Hello. Probably just for my own sake, I thought it was a really great talk because it helped introduce what I'm going to be talking about. One more thing, sorry. You know how the computer switches off when you don't do anything for a while? That would be awful. So what I'm going to be doing today is reading, oh my goodness. It's also not good. I've just happily published the 10th issue. There we go. Of F.R. David. F.R. David's a journal that's, as myself and as with most people here today who are going to be speaking, is concerned with the production of language, and in my case it's concerned with probably the secondary information that is produced in relation to the primary information that could be artistic objects, images, language itself, images of language. I think I'm a little more concerned about the production of the secondary information and the role of the reader in the production of that secondary information. So F.R. David attempts to set up a kind of self-reflexive space, self-reflexive in the page, the printed page, and our conditioned understanding that we've developed over quite a few centuries in relation to the printed page. Is exploited, but mainly in terms of readership. James was talking about distribution earlier. I'm absolutely concerned with the distribution of ideas, but I'm mainly concerned with the distribution of reading, not necessarily the distribution of writing, but the distribution of reading. And what I'm going to do today is read a selection of writings from the past 10 issues, these issues of F.R. David. I will say I was supposed to have a box of copies of the latest issue here today, but that box is hovering somewhere over the Atlantic still. So my sincere apologies for that, but please, when I'm done, if you would like to come and have a look or read or ask me anything, please do. So there's a concern with the distribution of reading, and especially a concern with the value that is accrued around artistic objects, images, text, images of text. The value accrued through reading, the reading of those objects. Contrary to this little program that I hope you all have now, one of the most beautiful examples of this is this text by Edward Johnston at the bottom, called On the Labeling of Exhibits. I've actually left that out, I'm afraid. I think the title probably already explains quite a bit about the production of, not necessarily that the labeling of exhibits is a secondary production of language, but the production of language that's necessary to catalogue and distribute ideas and distribute works and also perhaps the production of language that's necessary to produce that language. I think that's my main preoccupation, but I will say that I've left Edward Johnston out, but his writing is in this, I think the 7th edition of F.R. David, if you can find that. That piece of writing is from 1933. I woke up this morning in a blind panic thinking, oh my God, all the texts I'm going to be reading through are old. F.R. David, as an exercise in distribution, prefers to redistribute existing work. As an editor, I hardly ever work as a commissioner. I prefer to avoid the Douglas Hubler reference in terms of the production and overproduction. I prefer, again, to demonstrate this production of language as a distributed factor through the production of existing writing. So all of this writing is existing writing. Nearly all of it has been published before in some form or other. Just talking about the language produced, F.R. David is also concerned with the transformations that take place in everyday life, very informal transformations. So sometimes the issues become themed around something like conversation, letter writing, and silence, commentary, and it's hoping to be a kind of demonstrative exercise in how ideas become transformed through use. And again, the position of listening, not listening, also listening, but reading as a form of use. Not quite sure why I'm saying that exactly, but I can go back to my notes and figure it out. So yeah, it's concerned with these self-reflexive demonstrations of these transformations taking place, that certain ideas do not, or any idea does not have a fixed form. And although F.R. David is printed, it's absolutely concerned with how a lot of different forms of exchange and forms of different media and forms of distribution, forms of production around objects, around texts, can be put back on the page, and also how they get off the page as well, how these ideas can get back off the page. So F.R. David is very concerned with the relationship or the position of these transformations in relation to print, in relation to something that's usually considered quite fixed in nature. And I guess today I'm going to slightly contradict that by getting off the page, obviously. So I'm going to start with the very first issue and the very first piece of writing in that issue. After that, I'm not going to explain what I'm reading. I think it'll be clear. The future of writing. I'm just going to try this. You will hear me? Is that okay?
A little bit oversensitive to these things, sorry.
That's easy. Can you use the handheld for the camera?
Sorry?
Can you use the handheld for the camera?
Oh, I definitely can't use a handheld. Oh, so you're using this to record as well?
Yes.
Okay. Can you take me out of the PA and just put me through the mixer to the camera? Is that possible?
I don't know if it is.
Okay. Nick, can you hear me? Yeah. It is. The Future of Writing by Willem Visser. This essay will not consider the problems concerning the future of teaching the art of writing in the face of the growing importance of non-literate messages in our surroundings, although these problems will become ever more important both in the so-called developed countries and in societies where illiteracy is still a widespread phenomenon. Instead, it proposes to consider a tendency that underlies these problems, namely, the tendency away from linear codes, such as writing, and towards two-dimensional codes, such as photographs, film, and television. A tendency that may be observed if one glances even superficially at the codified world that surrounds us. The future of writing, of that gesture which aligns symbols to produce texts, must be seen against the background of that tendency. Writing is an important gesture because it both articulates and produces the state of mind which is called historical consciousness. History began with the invention of writing, not for the banal reason often advanced that written texts permit us to reconstruct the past, but for the more pertinent reason that the world is not perceived as a process historically, unless one signifies it by successive symbols, by writing. The difference between prehistory and history is not that we have written documents that permit us to read the latter, but that during history there are literate men who experience, understand and evaluate the world as a becoming. Whereas in prehistory no such existential attitude is possible. If the art of writing were to fall into oblivion, or if it were to become subservient to picture making, as in the script writing of films, history in the strict sense of the term would be over. If one examines certain Mesopotamian tiles, one can see that the original purpose of writing was to facilitate the deciphering of images. Those tiles contain images compressed upon them with cylindrical seals and cuneiform symbols scratched into them with a stylus. The cuneiform symbols form lines, and they obviously mean the image they accompany. They explain, recount, tell it. They do so by unrolling the surface of the image into lines, by unwinding the tissue of the image into the threads of a text, by rendering explicit what was implicit within the image. It may be shown through text analysis that the original purpose of writing, namely the transcoding of two-dimensional codes into a single dimension, is still there. Every text, even a very abstract one, means, in the last analysis, an image. The translation from surface into line implies a radical change of meaning. The eye that deciphers an image scans the surface, and thus it establishes reversible relations between the elements of the image. It may go back and forth while deciphering the image. This reversibility of relations that prevails within the image characterizes the world for those who use images for the understanding of the world, who imagine it. For them, all the things in the world are related to each other in such a reversible way, and their world is structured by eternal return. It's just as true to say that night follows day as day follows night, and that sowing follows reaping as that reaping follows sowing, that life follows death as that death follows life. The crowing of the cock calls the sun to rise in just as much as the rising sun calls the cock to crow. In such a world, circular time orders all things, assigns them their just place, and if a thing is displaced, it will be readjusted by time itself. Because to live is to displace things. Life in such a world is a series of unjust acts that will be revenged in time, the demands that man propitiate the order of the world, the gods of which it is full. In sum, the imagined world is the world of myth, of magic, the prehistorical world. The eye that deciphers a text follows its lines, and thus establishes the univocal relation of a chain between the elements of which the text is composed. Those who use text to understand the world, those who conceive it, mean a world with a linear structure. Everything in such a world follows from something. Time flows irreversibly from the past towards the future. Each instant is lost forever, and there's no repetition. Each day is different from every other day. Each sowing has its own characteristics. If there's a life after death, it must be a new sort of life, and the links of the causal chain cannot be exchanged one for the other. In such a world, every human act is unique, and man is responsible for it. The elements of such a world are, at least theoretically, distinct from each other. Like the beads on a string, they can be counted. On the other hand, the string that orders the beads, the univocal flow of time, is what holds such a world together. In sum, the conceived world is the world of the religions, of salvation, of political commitment, of science, and of technology, the historical world. Now, one may well ask why, 6,000 years ago, the effort was made to substitute the world of conception for the world of imagination. Why writing was invented. One may ask at this present precisely because a new civilization of images seems to be dawning. The answer is, of course, because 6,000 years ago, some people thought that some images needed explaining. Images are mediations between man and his world, a world that has become inaccessible to him immediately. They're tools to overcome human alienation. They are meant to permit action in a world in which man no longer lives immediately, but that he faces. Cave paintings are meant to permit hunting of ponies, and cathedral windows to permit praying to God, road maps to permit motoring, and statistical projections to permit decision-making. One must learn how to decipher those images, one must learn the conventions that give them their meaning, and one may commit mistakes. For instance, it would be a mistake to decipher road maps as if they were cave paintings, like magic for hunting tourists, or as if they were projections or proposals to build roads. The imagination that produces road maps is not the same as the imagination that produces cave paintings and projections. Explaining images with the help of texts may therefore be useful. Mr. Smith, in the course of conversation, produces a beautiful rumour, taking the perfect form, as it leads him, of a perfect sphere, which is caught up by Brown, who at once transforms the rumour into a square, passing it on to Tompkins, whom it leaves in the shape of an unknown geometrical problem, for Watson, who shrinks it to a little worm-like thing. Mrs. Robinson, however, expands it, but in the nature of a star, before handing it on to Jackson, who at once shatters it into a million fragments, that rumour, while passing it on to Baxter, who restores it to the original sphere, though in 3 separate portions, which are dealt with by Lewis. There he is, Lewis, after which it has no definite form, being rather that of a cloud of vapour. In due course, the rumour comes back to Mr. Smith, who quite fails to recognise it as his own creation. Above and beyond this participation, the poet had, perhaps for the first time, the opportunity to be an important, if not in fact a leading member of this new team. A team whose creative efforts were all in some respect or other concerned with verbal communication. One of Ian Hamilton Finlay's recent works is a screen print entitled Homage to Gomringer. The heavy cruiser Prince Eugène is sketched out against the neutral grey background, calling to mind the comparable profile of a full-rigged ship in the screen print's predecessor, Homage to Mozart. Eugène Gomringer, progenitor of the European movement of concrete poetry, is identified with the immaculate design of the modern warship, just as the strains of Mozart could be identified with the billowing rococo forms of the sailing ship. But there's also an allegory underpinning the use of Prince Eugène at this juncture. When the ship's dedicated German crew handed over the warship at the end of the Second World War, 10 out of 11 engines were working. But by the time that the Americans had sailed the Prince Eugène to Honolulu, only one of these was still in operation. The same thing has happened, Finlay implacably infers, to the cruiser concrete poetry. For the artists of the modern movement, Van Doesburg and the early constructivists, the classical constants lay in the vocabulary of geometrical forms that had declared itself in Cubism. Van Doesburg's elementarism was based on the conviction that radically simple geometrical forms could be taken as the common elements of plastic and architectural expression. Their impersonal, entirely accessible nature enabled them to be utilized in complex structures without concealing the constructional process. This text is kindly borrowed from the Jeff Koons Handbook. Slightly larger than the book you're holding in your hands, with the title in gloss silver debossed foil on a double-hit red 16-page cover depicting a freestanding reproduction of a pure white marble bust of the artist emerging from a kryptonite-like amalgam of crystals, self-portrait 1991. The book contains an introduction by Robert Rosenblum, published with Rizzoli International Publications, produced by Anthony Dorfe Gallery, and contains 176 pages of machine-coated paper with 11 chapters of 47 colour reproductions of Koons' work, complemented by numerous short grey texts, of which this is an example. A word used with great enthusiasm to describe the tracking of ideas when ideas are more or less passively brought into circulation. Or else they're apparently autonomous movement when ideas actively do the rounds of their own accord, amidst which we find ourselves. In all earnestness, we resent this mercantile notion, for what else really does circulate but money? And what else does money force upon the world covered with the mesh of its circuitry than, by absolute equivalence and under the same banner, the universal law of exchangeability? Firstly, we are not so sure whether ideas really move about of their own accord. Secondly, we're not so sure whether we should applaud the possibility of such mobility. We've long known that one idea's mobility is built on another idea's mobility, immobility. And that the latter, the immobile, has equally long been on the losing end of the equation. Why? Then, speaking about equations, a related note on the production of thought, or of anything else for that matter, to capital. Whether of the cultural, human, social, or symbolic variety, isn't it deeply depressing to equate anything with capital, as if there no longer is any other metaphor we can take recourse to? There's no such thing as symbolical capital. There are only symbols. There's only capital. But this leads us into a whole new and different debate, for sure. magical forms through which property resided in substance. Until this stage, weight was the most specific carrier for the inherence of power, and weight was and is a mixed condition, related locally to exertion. The focus of this condition is typically stone, and through this seems to be most obviously to insist on the compact outer surface, and in fact it provides the most important practical and cultic inside, the cave. The privilege of that ambiguity about surface gives the painted rock shelter and the megalithic chamber tomb the power of formal change, and in this way substance can be extended by incorporation to allow the magical and political social presences their due place. Whereas with copper, tin, and perhaps antimony, weight coincides with other possible conditions which are less mixed and specific: brightness, hardness, ductility, and general ease of working. And further, the abstraction of property, characterized as a formal rather than substantive, makes the production of alloys a question of technique in the most theoretical sense. Bronze may have been known to the Sumerians at a very early stage, and yet tin is rare in the Near East and must have been imported over considerable distances. The differences between the kinds of intent supporting the movement of bluestones from Pembrokeshire to Wessex, and the Sumerian acquisition of tin from Cornwall or Bohemia must be obvious. And through the agency of the most extensive control of force, namely fire, sword blades and spearheads could be forged into a strength infinitely more abstract than the flaking of high-quality flint or the hardening of wooden points. Their new quality thus gained was sharp and killed with a new speed and power from long range. Animal hides could be sewn up with metal bodkins and fish taken with fine wire hooks. The metal ploughshare could cut deeper into the soil and with less effort. The new quality of spiritual transfer was concentrated in these most durable forms of leading edge, seen especially in the flattened motive of ornament, and the history of substance, stone, shifts with complex social implication into the theory of power, metal. That's a deliberately simplified sketch, because it may well be that this theorizing of quality with its control over weaponry and tillage, and hence over life, induced a deeper cultural adherence to substance as the zone of being in which the condition was also limit, the interior knowledge of dying. By death I mean here in particular those forms of life and ritual, the extension of body in which persistence through material transmutation was an ego term, even when socialized, rather than one concerned chiefly with the outer world, enemies or animals hunted for food or flesh as objects. So that stone becomes the power substance, marking the incorporated extensions of dying, and is so still as a headstone, the vulgar or common correlative of hope for the afterlife. And in parallel with this reactive development, maybe an elexic theory of substance, comes the rapid advance of metallurgy, shifting from the transfer of life as power, hunting, into the more settled expectation of reaping what you've already sown. And this itself produces the idea of a place as the chief local fact, which makes mining and the whole extractive industry possible from then on. The threshing of millet or barley must bring a purer and more abstract theory of value. The mixed relativism of substance leads, by varied but in outline predictable stages, to value as a specialized function and hence as dependent on the rate of exchange. The Sumerian settlement was founded on the innovations of metallurgy And these abstractions of substance were in turn the basis for a politics of wealth. The concentration of theoretic power by iconic displacement of substance. The unit of exchange was still the ingot by weight, and not yet coins by number. But we're already in what Child called a money economy, as opposed to a natural economy, and there's already a code of practice for capital loaned out on interest. For a long time, the magical implications of transfer in any shape must have given a muted and perhaps not initially debased sacrality to objects of currency status, just as fishhooks and bullets become strongly magical objects in the societies formed around their use. But gradually, the item form becomes iconicized in transitions like that from es bruder, irregular bits of bronze, to es signatum, cast ingots or bars, to es grav, the circular stamped coin. The metonymic unit is established, and number replaces strength or power as the chief assertion of presence. In consequence, trade routes undergo a dramatic expansion, since mercantile theory operates with the most conspicuous success when employed over large intercultural distances. In the early Bronze Age Peninsula Italy, Central Europe, the West Baltic coastlands, and the British Isles were united by a single system for the distribution of metal rooted in the Aegean market. The clearest instance of this type of change arises probably where a more sophisticated and progressive economy meets an idiom of change and value less efficiently abstracted. The mercantile contact between the seaborne traders of the Eastern Mediterranean and the peoples of the Anatolian hinterland can show this indication already by the late Bronze Age, for this region around 1600 BC. On the great alluvial plains of Asia, the condition was one of power rather than value, that is, substance and not, in the first instance, transfer as exchange. Flocks and herds can be stolen, battered, bartered, given in gift or tribute, so that wealth, for the most part, is the power of a technique to hold all that. Again, the politics of limit. Whereas the Greek traders were already middlemen with no political standing, Sardis, no city but a commercial centre, working on the trick of abstract distance between real supply and real demand. Lydia, as Charles again said, was a frontier kingdom owing its prosperity to transit trade. Here, finally, and for the first time according to tradition, arises sheer mercantile distance in the form of coin, where the magical resonance of transfer is virtually extinct. That coined money must have been evolved here in the Eastern Mediterranean is not surprising, for it was an area of intense commercial activity, encouraged and fostered by natural advantages. The Lydians, the first shopkeepers, as Herodotus calls them, as well as the neighbouring Ionians, received goods from the caravan routes and river communications across Asia. They had access to safe and sheltered harbours for easy coastwise trade. They exported their famous Chian wines, their purple dye which gave its name to Etherae, and their Samian pots, but above all they were renowned for their gold, which provided the fabulous wealth of Croesus and still more fabulous wealth of Midas. And Croesus, the first recorded millionaire, is also the first to devise a bimetallic currency, where even the theoretic properties of metal are further displaced into the stratified functionalism of a monetary system. We are almost completely removed from presence as weight, and at this point the emergence of a complete middle class based on the technique of this removal becomes a real possibility, so that by this stage there is the possible contrast of an exilic left-wing history of substance. And yet the shifts are offset and multiple, and in the earlier stages are accompanied by extensions of awareness newly sharpened by exactly that risk. The literal is not magic, for the most part, and it's how the power of displacement side-slips into some entirely other interest which is difficult, not a simple decision that any one movement is towards ruin. Stone is already the abstraction of standing, of balance, and dying is still the end of man's self-enrichment, the reason why he still does it. The North American Indians developed no real metallurgy at all, or any stage of their history. The whole shift and turn is not direct, as Charlie too insistently would have us believe, but rather the increasing speed of the displacement which culminates only later in a critical overbalance of intent. If we're confident over the more developed consequences at the unrecognized turn, we are still at a loss to say where or why.
I wish I were single again. I wish I were single again. Jag organized whistling. Jag organized whistling. Wish I were single again. I wish I were single.
This is a great piece by Beth Anderson. A sound poem based around a riff, I wish I was single again.
I wish I were single.
That she submits to anagrammatic operations and basically chants and sings anagrams of these 6 words.
Single I, we, she, were see, Seru I sween, Jag organized
Beth Anderson is from Kentucky, but then moved down to the Bay Area. She's a very well-known new music composer. She studied with John Cage, Terry Riley, Robert Ashley, and Larry Austin at Mills College. But all the while, she did these beautiful sound poetry pieces.
Again, a whoop is, I win, I jag, I aim, a whoop, in, ya,